I'm back, and we are all in today on reparations after that blockbusting report came out yesterday about San Francisco and its advisory reparations committee recommendation of $5 million for reparations for African Americans in the city of San Francisco. And joining me in this hour is Dr. Cheryl Davis. She's the executive director of the Human Rights Division in San Francisco, and Melanie Collette. She's a political commentator. I'm also taking your calls in this hour and your comments on YouTube. You have a question or a comment, give us a call, 1-800-920-1580. Fatima posted a comment on our YouTube page, and Fatima, you are so right. She said, we wouldn't be here if they had simply given us the damn 40 acres and a mule. So we absolutely know we would not be here. And I want to take a call from Mike. Mike is calling in from Los Angeles. You're on the air, Mike.
Here. I was just thinking, even if you got $5 million, you bought $1 million house, you'd have to be paying $1,000 a month just for taxes on that house. And if it was a $2 million house, you'd be paying $2,000 a month just on the taxes alone on the house. Haven't gotten to utilities or repairs or anything. And if you get $5 million, are you going to have to pay taxes on that $5 million when you get it?
That's a great question, Mike. And that came up with the money that the family, Bruce's Beach, the descendants of Charles and Willa Bruce, who got back the 4 parcels of beachfront land in Manhattan Beach, California. And they actually had to do something at the state legislative level in order to avoid that money from being taxed in the way that it typically would be. But Melanie, this is where you can jump back in. This is your financial literacy. So you got $5 million. Mike is worried. You buy $1 million house, you got property taxes and other expenses associated with that. Help us understand how you can spend that $5 million and do so if you choose to. Because again, I'm all for whatever you want to do with your money, you do with it. But go ahead, Melanie. You wanted to talk about financial literacy.
Well, listen, if that is going to be, I have a whole lot of problems with this for a number of reasons. Like, okay, so when we say if they had gave us that money, like there's not like a mystery they. Like they are taxpayers that money is coming from, unless you're going to track down descendants of slave owners and make those families pay, like if that's the philosophy. But also, do you get a credit if your white family died during the civil rights movement defending our rights, died during slavery defending our rights? There are white people, anytime that you make policy that is race-centered, it is going to be problematic because of our history. And I just don't see how you do it in a way that is fair. I mean, do you make these properties tax-free for the rest of their lives? And so you have these reparations properties that are not obligated to pay the basic taxes that everyone else has to pay to go towards schools and public roads and those kinds of things. Like how do you square that circle? And those things still have to be paid for, which is going to mean that white counterparts are going to have to pay more in order to make up for that gap. Is that fair? Do Black people care that? Well, do Black people who are pro-reparations care about the fairness? Or is the acting presumption is that all white people are guilty and so they should all pay? And we just know that is not true.
Okay, Melanie, let me have Cheryl jump in. Go ahead, Cheryl. Respond to what Melanie, she's posed this question. Is the presumption that all white folks are responsible? And do we care about fairness? We being Black people Blacks and whites who are pro-reparations.
Yeah, I mean, I think fair is is not the right question to ask here, because I think that in terms of, because if you're going to talk about fair with regards to white people today, we have to talk about what was fair. And I think the caller or the question in the chat was more about the they, wasn't about the people today. If they, the folks who had enslaved and then released the slaves, had given, if the government had followed through on their 40 acres and a mule after the Civil War, then she's saying we wouldn't be in this position today, not the folks that lived today. And what's not fair is that there were promises made, and that throughout society, throughout time, whether it's politicians, whether it is Wells Fargo Bank, whether it is the other banks that have profited. We have a slavery disclosure ordinance here in San Francisco where folks were supposed to volunteer and let us know if they made money off of the slave trade. And Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all of these banks that many of us continue to give our money to, that's making interest or charging fees off of us, continue to make that money. And that's not necessarily fair, right? Like that the insurance companies, all of these things have happened and they have continued to profit. And we as a society have continued to profit and benefit from that. That is not fair. And so as we have this conversation, as we unpack it, like it can't be one side has to be fair and the other side does not. We have all, and society as a whole has continued to benefit from white supremacist culture. And to say, well, I wasn't born back then. I wasn't born back then either, but I have still feeling the impact. And if anybody gets to go visit Southern Spaces, there's still Jim Crow, whether there are signs up or not. There's still bias. There's still discrimination. San Francisco isn't even looking at it in terms of they're not even looking at it in terms of slavery. We're looking at it in terms of real tangible, to be able to say, right, like the housing, the people that were displaced, folks that lost their businesses. There are 900 Black businesses that were forced out, right? Like that's a real tangible thing. And it's not fair, but the government has never apologized, has never gone back, and nobody has come back and said, let's fix the wrong that was done, not by our ancestors, but by our policies.
Hold on a second, Melanie. Hold on a second, Melanie. I'm going to let you respond. I got to take a call from James. James is calling in. You're on the air, James.
Good evening, ladies. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Go ahead, James. What's your question or comment?
Well, my comment is that even though reparations sound good, who are we going to give it to? Because we're so intertwined now with Caribbean Afros, African Afros, European Afros, those who came from the islands in the South Pacific. We don't know who's going to get the money. And then furthermore, they're not going to give us that kind of money because some of us we use it to build political wealth and also have more monetary wealth. We would build on it, and they can't allow us to become equal next to them. That's bottom line.
All right. Thanks for your comment, James. Go ahead, Melanie. You want to respond to what Cheryl said.
The problem that I have is that I feel like, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, that the they that is always referred to seems to be this mystery entity that does not contain real people, real taxpayers who, when we're talking about tangible assets, we're talking about their tangible money being taken away from them for something that they did not do, that they were not responsible for. So, I just don't see how that is right. I don't think that you can right the evils of redlining, bias, all of those things that still even go on today. I don't think you can right that by punishing people who are innocent. The first person who taught me about investing was a white man.
Melanie, hold on a second. First of all, let's depersonalize this. The they that Cheryl is talking about is the system of the U.S. government. It's not an individual. We're not talking about John or Bob or Hank or, Greg. We're talking about a system. Systemic racism looks at systems that have oppressed people of color. And so when we use the word they, it's just a colloquial term for the system of government. So that's who the they are. So we don't have to talk about individuals. So when we talk about a system of government, the government is an inanimate object. So we're not punishing any individual. We're talking about these systems. When we come forward, though, I want to get both of your take on a white guy. The University of Richmond recently removed the name of T.C. Williams, who was a benefactor for the law school in Richmond, Virginia. And they removed the name because the guy owned slaves in the 19th century. Now his descendant says, look, if you want to take my great-great-grandfather's name off your building because he owned slaves, give us back the money that he donated to the institution. I want to get your take on that when we come forward. KBLA Talk 1580.